Good morning. Today we continue with the Mystery of Contentment, Chapter 2. We'll conclude this chapter today and check these last these last 2 points that Burroughs is making here. Number 6. A gracious heart is contented by the melting of his will and desires into God's will and desires. By this means he gets contentment. This too is a mystery to a carnal heart. It is not by having his own desires satisfied, but by melting his will and desires into God's will, so that, in one sense, he comes to have his desires satisfied, though he does not obtain the thing that he desired before. Still, he comes to be satisfied with this, because he makes his will to be at one with God's will. This is a small degree higher than submitting to the will of God. You all say that you should submit to God's will. A Christian has got beyond this. He can make God's will and his own the same. It is said of believers that they are joined to the Lord and are one spirit. That means that whatever God's will is, I do not only see good reason to submit to it, but God's will is my will. When the soul can make over, as it were, its will to God, it must needs be contented. Others would fain get the thing they desire, but a gracious heart will say, "Oh, what God would have, I would have too. I will not only yield to it, but I would have it too." A gracious heart has learned this art, not only to make the commanding will of God to be its own, that is, what God commands me to do, I will do it, but to make the providential will of God, the operative will of God, to be his will too. God commands this thing, which perhaps you who are Christians may have some skill in. But whatever God works, you must will as well as what God commands. You must take God's providential will and his operative will as your will, as well as God's will, and in this way you must come to contentment. A Christian makes over his will to God, and in making over his will to God, he has no other will but God's. Suppose a man were to make over his debt to another man. If the man to whom I owe the debt be satisfied and contented, I am satisfied, because I have made it over to him, and I need not be discontented and say my debt is not paid and I am not satisfied. Yes, you are satisfied, for he to whom you made over your debt is satisfied. It is just the same for all the world between God and a Christian. A Christian heart makes over his will to God. Now then, if God's will is satisfied, then I am satisfied, for I have no will of my own. It is melted into the will of God. That is the excellence of grace. Grace does not only subject the will to God, but it melts the will into God's will, so they are now but one will. What a sweet satisfaction to the soul must have in this condition, when all is made over to God. You will say, "This is hard." I will express it a little more. A gracious heart must needs have satisfaction in this way, because godliness teaches him this, to see that his good is more in God than himself. The good of my life and the comforts and happiness, my glory and my riches are more in God than myself. We may perhaps speak more of that when we come to the lessons that are to be learned. It is by this that a gracious heart gets contentment. He melts his will into God's, for he says, "If God has glory, I have glory. God's glory is my glory. Therefore, God's will is mine. And if God has riches, I have riches. If God is magnified, I am magnified. If God is satisfied, I am satisfied. God's wisdom and holiness is mine. Therefore, his will must needs be mine, and my will must needs be his." This is the art of a Christian's contentment. He melts his will into the will of God, and makes over his will to God. O Lord, thou shalt choose our inheritance for us. Psalm 47:4. 7. The mystery consists not in bringing anything from outside to make my condition more comfortable, but in purging out something that is within. Now the men of the world, they would have contentment and lack anything. Oh, they must have something from outside to content them. But a godly man says, "Let me get something out that is in already, and I shall come to contentment." Suppose a man has a fever, and that makes what he drinks taste bitter. He says, "You must put some sugar into my drink." His wife puts some in, and the drink tastes better. Why? Or still, the drink tastes bitter. Why? Because the bitterness comes from a bitter choleric humor within. But let the physician come and give him a bitter potion to purge out the bitterness that is within, and then he can taste his drink well enough. It is just the same with the men of the world. Oh, such circumstances are bitter, and if I could have such and such a mercy added to this mercy, then it would be sweet. But even if God should put a spoonful or two of sugar in, it would still be bitter. The way to contentment is to purge out your lust and bitter humors. From whence are wars and strifes? Are they not from your lusts that are within you? James 4:1. They are not so much from things outside, but from within. I have sometimes said, not all storms that are abroad can make an earthquake, but the vapors that have got within. So if those lusts that are within in your heart were got out, your condition would be a contented condition. These are the mysteries of godliness that the men of the world never think of. When did you ever think in such a way as this, to go and purge out the diseases of your heart that are within? Here are 7 particulars now named, and there are many more. Without the understanding of these things and the practice of them, you will never come to a true contentment in your life. Oh, you will be bunglers in the trade of Christianity. But the right perceiving of these things will help you to be instructed as in a mystery. And so that's where chapter 2 concludes. And he picks up chapter 3, which is called The Mystery of Contentment Continued. And there'll be another chapter, chapter 4, The Mystery of Contentment Concluded. So this section is a substantial part of the book. And this first one today about melting the heart into God's will is really excellent, worth going back and listening to or reading again. And so thank you for watching today. I hope you have a great day.